In this video, we will talk about promise in JavaScript and we will use a simple technique to learn about it. So let's try to understand about promise by using a real world example. So this cute boy, he wants to go on for a vacation and he asks his dad, "Hey dad, can we go on for a vacation?" Dad thinks for a while and he says, "Hey son, I don't have an answer right now, but I promise you that I will get back to you. Whether we are going or not, I will give you an answer." Okay? Mom was listening to this entire conversation, and mom says to her son that once you hear back from dad, just let me know. I don't want to know whether we are going or not, but I just want to know when your promise is settled. In JavaScript terms, while the dad is thinking, the promise is in pending state. Once dad makes up his mind, and if he says, yes, we are going, then it means that the promise is fulfilled. If the dad says, no, we cannot go, I have other commitments, then the promise is rejected. So this is a very simple explanation of how promises work in JavaScript. A promise is an object representing the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation. I took this definition from Mozilla. In simple words, if you write a JavaScript function and that function cannot return the response right away, it means that it is an asynchronous function and it should return a promise. So if we are trying to sum two numbers, we can return the response right away. And we don't need to return a promise in this case. But if we are trying to fetch an email from the server, then it's gonna take some time. Depending upon the server speed, it can take many seconds to get the response. So we should return a promise in that case. Now let's see how we can write this example in JavaScript using a function and a promise. So I would write a new function here. Function can we go on vacation? And since the dad cannot return the response right away, we would return a promise here. Return new promise. And inside the constructor, I would pass a function with two callbacks, resolve and reject. And let's see the dad gives a response after 5 seconds. In real world, it would be days, but here we cannot wait for days. So I would just give 5 seconds. So set timeout 5 seconds. And let's say the dad says, yes, we are going on for a vacation. So I would pass resolve and then we are going for vacation. So this means that after 5 seconds, we are going to invoke the resolve callback and we would pass this message to the callback as an argument. Now, son would call this function and this function would return a promise. So we can invoke then method on a promise and we can grab the message that is passed and we can write here console.log message. So if the promise is fulfilled or if it is resolved, it goes into the then method. So after 5 seconds, we saw that we got this message. Now, mom also wants to know that once you hear back from dad, she wants to get notified too. So I would call finally, and this finally would say, hey mom, dad gave me an answer. So after 5 seconds, we should see the message along with the message that is written inside the finally block. So we saw that we are going on for a vacation, and then hey mom, dad gave me an answer. What if dad decides to reject uh, the request and he says, I we cannot go on for a vacation. I have other commitments. So, and the reject callback is used to reject the promise. So you can see here that finally block is getting executed, but we cannot see the rejected response here. And that's because if a promise is rejected, it goes in the catch method. So we can write here console.log dad rejected the request, and then we can type the message here. And then I forgot this. So after 5 seconds, we should see a message. Dad rejected the request. We cannot go on for a vacation. I have other commitments. And this finally block gets printed irrespective of whether the promise is fulfilled or rejected. So this is a very simple example of promise. Here we understood that if a function cannot return the response right away, we would always return a promise. If the promise is fulfilled, it goes into the then method. If the promise is rejected, it goes inside this catch block. And irrespective of the promise is rejected or fulfilled, finally block will always get executed. Now let's talk about promise chaining with the help of an example. Let's continue to work on our previous example. This then method can return another promise. So I can write new return new promise function resolve reject, and then after 5 seconds I want to say another promise resolve. And then since this returns a promise, we can call another then method here to capture the resolved response of this promise. So I would write message console.log message. So I'll make it 2 seconds here so that it's quicker. So after 5 seconds, we should see a response that another promise resolved. Hey mom, dad gave me an answer. From this then, method, we can return another promise, another promise result. And then let's wait for a few seconds and we should see this response. Okay, so we did not see any response because since this then returning a promise, we should capture it with another then method. So I can write message console.log message. So this should print another promise resolved after 2 and 2 4 and 5 9 seconds. another promise result. So this is known as promise chaining. Here, from every then method, we are returning a response, and we can return as many promises as we would like. And this is known as chaining. Let's try to understand more about promises by solving these cases. So the first case is John wants to go on for a trip to Italy with three of his best friends, Sam, Ravi, and Manuel, and John will go only if all three agree, and he will inform his mom and dad only if he's going. So John would ask Sam. Sam can take some time to return a response. Similarly, Ravi and Manuel can take some time to return a response. And eventually, if all three say yes, then only John will go and he will tell his parents. So let's try to do this in JavaScript. So John would ask Sam, and Sam is going to return a promise because Sam cannot return the response right away. So Sam would say function resolve reject and then set timeout, and after 5 seconds Sam says yes. So Sam is saying yes because he is resolving the promise. Now ask Ravi. Ravi also says yes. And ask Manuel. Manuel is slow in responding, so let's say Manuel takes about 10 seconds to return the promise. Then we want to capture these three promises, and the way to do is by using promise.all, and then we will create array, and then we will pass these three methods because these three methods returns a promise. So ask Manuel, ask Sam, and ask Ravi. So this array is an array of promises, and then we will call then method. Then this then method would return an array of response, so message, and then we can say console.log hey mom, dad, I am going. Okay, so we did a mistake somewhere. So we didn't write function, so we should write function everywhere. Okay. And we have made one more mistake, so this should be a function. So after 10 seconds, we should see this message, hey mom, dad, I'm going. So promise.all goes into this then method only if all these promises are fulfilled. If one of the promise rejects, then we should not see this. Let me try to write a finally so that we can see it is complete, because finally gets executed irrespective of whether the promise is fulfilled or rejected. Complete. So it's complete. it did not go into this then method because one of the promise is rejected. So this .promise.all is a useful way to capture if all the promises are fulfilled or not. If fulfilled, it goes into then. So this is all about promise.all. Let's look at another case. I have applied for MS in 3 universities and I hope I get selected. And I will inform my parents only if I get selected. That's because if I'm not selected, I don't need to inform them. So let's write this in JavaScript. So I'm going to write 3 functions here, one for each university. Function apply for MS in University 1, return new promise, function resolve reject. These are the callbacks. And then after 5 seconds, this will reject the promise. So after 5 seconds, we cannot accept you. I'm going to copy and paste this 2 more times. So University 2, this will be University 3, and let's say none of the universities accept me. So we cannot admit you. Sorry, you applied after deadline. Now I want to inform my parents if I get selected in any one of these universities. So I'm going to write promise.any and I'm going to pass array of promises here. So I'm going to write apply for University 1, then 2 and 3. Two, and then 3, and then I'm going to invoke then method here, and then I'm also going to write finally so that we can see if when this call is completed. Console.log completed. Okay, so we have made one mistake somewhere. Let's correct it. And then let's see this. So here we should see this completed. So here what's happening here is that this promise.any will get into this then method only if I get fulfilled response from one of these promises. So let's say if I change this to resolve. So this means that this function is resolving my promise. So we selected you. And then I'm also going to write hey mom, dad, I am selected. So let's see the response now. So here you can see that if any one of the promise is resolved, promise.any gets into this then method. If I resolve this promise, then let's see what happens. We also get the same response. Now let's say if this returns me a resolved promise in 2 seconds. Let's see what comes up. So here, okay, I should change this message because we are resolving this promise. You are selected. So here you can see that, you are selected comes up. So promise.any gets into this then method with the first resolved promise. So whichever promise is resolved first, you will get the response of that in this then method. And you should always use promise.any if you just want to know whether one of the promises from this array gives you a resolved response. So let's look at this case now. Your friend is throwing a party and he has told you to invite 2 of his best friends on his behalf. Whether they are coming or not, he wants to get notified. Let's try to write this in JavaScript. So I'm going to write 2 functions here. Function invite friend 1, and then I'm going to write return new promise function with 2 callback resolve and reject, and then I'm going to return resolve because this friend is coming after 2 seconds, and then I'm going to write name. So this is a JSON object, so I'm going to write name friend1, and then I'm going to create another function for friend2. So invite friend2, and let's say this friend says I am not coming, so it's rejecting the promise. So reject the promise, and it takes about 6 seconds, so I'm going to write 6 seconds here. Now here we want to capture both the promises, whether they are rejected or fulfilled. So I'm going to write promise.all settled. This all settled means that once your promise is settled, we will execute this then block. So once all the promises inside this array are settled, it will come inside this then block. So I'm going to pass invite friend1, invite friend2, and this then it will give an array of results. So the 0th index will have result from this invite friend1, and the promise result at index 1 would be the result of this promise invite friend2. So let's iterate through this. Results dot for each, and then for now let's just print console.log result. So let's see what comes up here. So after 2 seconds, this promise is fulfilled, and after 5 seconds, this promise is rejected. So we got both the responses. So here, let's say if I want to write a finally here, we can also write finally, and then I can write console.log both the friends answered. So that way we would know both the friends have answered. Okay, so here there is one more thing. If the promise is fulfilled, we will get status and value. And if the promise is rejected, we will get status with the reason. So that's the difference between how you will get the response based on whether the promise is rejected or resolved. Fulfilled here means the promise is resolved. So if you are interested in knowing the response for all the promises, you should always use promise.allSettled. And all settled means here that promise is all the promises are either rejected or resolved. Let's look at this case now. You and your brother are currently in office. After work, you will go to grocery store to buy some groceries, and your brother will go and pick up pizza from the Domino's. Whether or not you get groceries or your brother gets pizza, whoever reaches home first will unlock the house and open the door so that the other one can come in. So here we are racing against time, and let's do this in JavaScript. So I'm going to write two functions here. Function me going to grocery store, and then I'm going to return a response. Return new promise. Then I'm going to pass two callbacks, resolve and reject. And let's say I spend 15 seconds in grocery store and I could not find anything. So I'm going to do reject after 15 seconds, and then I'm going to pass a JSON object here. So here I would give name as me, and I would give label as found nothing. I'm going to create one more function here for my brother. So brother going to Domino's, and let's say my brother spends 10 seconds and he found the pizza. So I'm going to do resolve here. So pizza picked up, and now I'm going to call promise dot race because we are racing against each other, and then I'm going to pass array of promises here. Me going to grocery store, brother going to Domino's, and then I'm going to invoke then, and I'm going to just type console.log result, and I'm also going to call catch in case the promise is rejected and it comes first. It will go inside this catch block. So catch result console.log result, and then I'm going to call finally so that we can see that this promise.race is completed. So console.log completed. So let's see. After 10 seconds, we should see this being returned in the catch block. So we saw that this is returned in the catch block. And let's say if I spend only 5 seconds, then I'll come first, and you should see this being displayed in this then method. So this is how promise.race works. Whichever promise gets completed first, it will go inside this then method or catch method, depending upon whether it is resolved or rejected. Let's look at one last example. In this example, we will fetch the data from the server. We can use the global fetch function that is available as part of fetch API to fetch the data from the server. This fetch function runs natively in the browser and it is available in almost all the browsers except for Internet Explorer. Since we will get the response from the server in some time and it's an asynchronous process, the fetch function returns a promise, and from that promise we can get the response. If the backend server is down or if the backend returns any error, by backend I mean server here, then it will go inside the catch block. So the promise is rejected if you get any error from the backend or if the server is down. So this is how you would typically write a function to fetch the data from the server. We have reached the end of this tutorial. Now that you know the basics of promises, you can write some JavaScript functions and explore more about promises.